So this is going to be a much quicker video than the normal videos. We're going to be covering the top 5, what I feel are the top 5 most underrated skills of the Survivor side and the Demon side. And keep this a bit more fair, what I'm going to be running is I'm going to be picking one from each of the demons, plus one generic one that's kind of shared between some of them in some capacity, and one from each of the classes, and one that's shared between each of them. So, without further ado, we'll keep this relatively short and sweet. These are these are skills in your skill tree that I generally try to build towards, that I think is very good for each class. And I'm actually going to give the demons some love first, because the demons are a lot more unique. There's a lot more room for debate, so if I spend longer, I want to spend longer on these guys. First up, we have the Warlord, also known as Henrietta. And in my opinion, the one that I think is probably the best underrated ability for her is Hemophobia. Now, Hemophobia is a really interesting ability in my opinion. I like the blood spatter mechanic for the elites. So if you don't know what the elite Deadites, they have this mechanic where when they get hit, their blood spatter obscures the vision on nearby survivors. It temporarily blinds them. This in and of itself does nothing. However, the main reason that I like this is Hemophobia. Now, I do prefer it in its old pre-nerf state, where it was 135 as opposed to 123. If you notice, I only run this at 1 point, and I run high blood pressure at 2 points for the extra range. The reason why I really like this ability is you can just drop one skill point to this and be good. Each individual blood spatter that falls on the survivor increases their fear by 1. And there's some interesting mechanics you can do. I'm planning on, when Prestige and Warlord, I'm planning on putting my points into her to put this ability at 3. I would like if the devs buffed it. If the devs buffed it, I would probably rework my builds a little bit more to make that number higher. But her elites are pretty good. They're not great, but they are pretty good. One of the main reasons why I like her elite so much is because she can build fear traps, which are now guaranteed. You can't dodge out of fear traps anymore. So you can have a unique mechanic around possessing Henrietta units, where you possess a survivor, run them into a fear trap, which is going to cause their fear to raise after their fear just dropped from said fear trap. They have to now fight that elite unit, which causes Hemophobia to activate. And if you have the build set up the way I do, which has Health Raise or Elite, that's more blood spatter that gets on them to raise their fear, you can potentially create a cycle where you possess the survivor, run them into a fear trap, they kill the elite, they're in possession range again, you possess them, run them into another fear trap. It's not a bad mechanic for taking out solo isolated survivors, and I think as a filler ability, if you have just 1 point that you need to spend for Henrietta, I think it's a very underrated perk. The only downside I would say to this perk is if you do not plan on possessing survivors at all. I have seen some Henriettas that just straight up are like basics and boss. They don't touch elites, they don't touch fear traps, their goal is just rush down high damage. Then this build doesn't necessarily work for you. I do find that the underrated one. Now, Puppeteer has a lot of abilities that are underrated, kind of under the radar. Very good abilities in this tree that only require 1 or a few points to get value out of. Now, the common build you see is around Puppet Master, so we're not going to talk about Puppet Master abilities. There's a lot of builds that I have seen on here that people talk about and say, oh, well, you want to build into elites, you want to build into basics, you want to build into boss, you want to build into lightning. Realistically, the ability to me that I think is the best is Scared to Death, which Scared to Death synergizes incredibly well if you mesh it with a survivor-based possession build. Now, I personally don't like that. I do think one of the rewards that they could have thrown in for prestiging, by the way, instead of, you know, an insignia and a level up, basically, each level, except at 3 where you get a Screamer. Ooh, wow. I think like a reward at level 2 and a reward at level 4 could maybe be an extra loadout slot where you could choose at the start of the game when the 4 survivors should be revealed to you, the demon, the same time that the demon is revealed to the survivors. You could choose a loadout. That would be an interesting mechanic. You could have 3 loadouts, so you could make different builds, and you could decide what you wanted to run. That's a procedural reward I would like to see for demon players. However, right now, Scared to Death is a really good ability in my opinion. The fear per hit is not particularly great. It's only 2 fear per hit. But one of the main reasons why I like this is because this synergizes incredibly well with basics. You don't have to possess a unit in order for this to work. This works on any evil unit. This works on any AI unit, basic, elite, etc. Meaning no matter what you're building into, this ability is just going to passively increase the fear of your survivors. The only way that this build really gets countered is if you're not possessing survivors, or if you go up against Pablo. Or Support Ash. I would say Pablo and Support Ash are pretty much the 2 characters that can counteract this, but this is an incredibly good build for spam possessing survivors, particularly if you're running skills like Demon Skin, Puppet Master Damage Done, etc. That being said, if you're not planning on possessing survivors, I don't think this bonus fear mechanic is particularly good. Now, the Necromancer has some obvious quote-unquote trap abilities that everybody knows are good, everybody would say are mandatory. A great example being some of the one-picks, like Bone Rage, giving you extra offensive attacks out of your basic skeletons, irreparable damage, being an anti-heal whenever you have your boss up, you know, some of the basics like health increases, stuff like that. Some people build cooldown reduction. I don't like Relentless Evil at only 10%. You know, there's a lot of skills in my opinion here that are very good. However, the one to me that is the most important now for boss builds is improved Infernal Invigoration at 40%. This gives you an almost absurd amount of healing off of your Force Choke ability. Now, you have to let the Force Choke ability complete to get the full heal, and it doesn't increase the damage that the Infernal Invigoration is doing to the survivor, but the amount of healing you can get out of it is incredibly strong. One of the main issues that Evil Ash has is he's kind of a glass cannon. He's kind of meant to be brought out with the skeleton support, and he's kind of meant to, you know, drop skeletons, drop skeletal res, and then start brawling the survivors. And just while you're doing that, while you're in the animations of raising your skeleton, putting your fist up for the skeletal revive ability, you can end up losing a good chunk of your health. I've seen Evil Ashes that get melted. Improved Infernal Invigoration is one of the best ways to counter this strategy if you time it properly. You don't want to time it when your balance bar is low. You don't want to time it when you're getting absolutely wailed on by either warriors or poked at from a distance by the hunters. And you generally want to try and grab a target that's less likely to escape it. You want to grab, in my opinion, you're looking to grab a leader or a support. If you grab a warrior, it's not going to do a lot of damage to them. They're a tanky unit anyways. And most warriors are going to F-chain once you get near them, or they're just going to try and swing their way through. This ability gives you an absurd amount of healing, though. I've tested this. I've gotten almost a 25% heal out of it, although that was before I ran Health Razor Boss at 3. I only had Health Razor Boss at 1, I believe, when I tested that. This ability still gives you an absurd amount of healing if you can land it, and I think it's a really good tool for the Necromancer. The Plaguebringer. I mentioned this in my Plaguebringer guide, and I really feel the need to mention this, because I see a lot of Plaguebringer builds right now that don't do this. Combat Fatigue. So the Blight build does an absurd amount of damage to the survivors if you build it similar to this. This build is focused around gaining Infernal Energy very quickly off of using light and heavy attacks, and then using something like Vicious Circle with basic units to just keep spam infecting Blight. Those Blight conditions stack. This gives you 7 Blight conditions. You're dealing each lasting 15 seconds. each dealing 2 damage per second. So that's a total of 30 health. But that ability can keep restacking and being reapplied, right? However, combat fatigue is really what brings it all together. Combat fatigue makes it so that the blight-infected survivors deal 20% less damage. This is less damage from all sources. If you're playing an elite build with combat fatigue, this means that warriors will be able to do basically nothing to you, because their melee damage, which is already nerfed by 70%, goes down to 90%. Their gun damage, which is already nerfed by 50%, goes down to 70%. This build effectively shuts down a warrior's ability to kill elite units. Basic units are still going to suffer because of how frail they are. This is a really solid build if you are trying to get the most out of your Plaguebringers. I have seen some Plaguebringers today that ran similar builds that did an utterly absurd amount of damage to me. As Scotty, I basically got 1v1'd by the Plaguebringer today as both Scotty and Leader Ash, just because of how much the Blight spam works. And combat fatigue made it impossible for me to 1v1 because I just simply could not kill it in time. In terms of a generic ability that multiple characters share that I think is pretty good on the demon side, Puppeteer has the best one of the bunch. I will highlight it, and that would be Test of Time. Test of Time increases the duration for any objective event. This is your blue timers for survivors while the demon player is inside the objective's aura. This is either in their spirit form or in their possessed form. Now, the Puppeteer has 2 versions of this. One is Test of Time, which is the one we're going to be covering. They also have a bonus one, More Time to Kill, when you possess a survivor in an objective area. The progress timer for that objective slows down by an additional 40%. Stacking these is very good, but this is only really good in survivor objective possession type builds. And the Puppeteer's strength right now is more in basic unit possession and being able to rush down with Puppet Master early game. Test of Time, however, is a very generic good skill. So this ability allows the objective events to stay up much longer, and it's very good for counteracting leader-focused builds. Now, Test of Time is capped at 35% on Puppeteer. The numbers used to be different for each class. I don't remember if they have changed these. The Necromancer, he has Test of Time. Test of Time on the Necromancer is only 15%. This ability isn't as good at 15%, but any slowdown on those objective timers buys you more time to kill. I know Henrietta's is at 20%. And you can see the design of it with the skeleton being able to have so many units out. He has the least amount, whereas the Puppeteer is focused more on 1v1, gets the most bang for his buck. Now, the downside to Test of Time is that it doesn't work if you're not in the circle, meaning if you need to leave the circle to go get energy, that bonus goes away. But that slowdown is a very strong ability to have in terms of being able to combat the survivors being grouped up and progressing that timer down. The more survivors in the objective, the faster it ticks away. If all 4 survivors are grouped up, you can effectively shut down a good 1 or 2 survivors being in that circle by just running Test of Time. Now, most of your trees on the survivor side are going to be ran relatively similar. Each of the 4 categories of survivor have a generic tree that you are going to want to fill in, that all of your supports are going to be running the same thing. All of your hunters are going to run some of the same things. All of your warriors are going to run some of the same things. All your leaders are going to run some of the same things. So on some of these builds, I want to be highlighting skills that I don't see getting picked a lot that are in all or the majority of my builds. And I would like to explain why a little bit more. So, for the leader class, the ability that we're going to talk about is I Can Still Help. This is a 1 skill point, and I often see this tree getting overlooked. This tree right here is what makes leaders impactful in the game, in my opinion, and oftentimes, outside of Artful Dodger 1, I see little to no use in this tree whatsoever. So all of the leaders' effects are based around their aura. there's no reason not to maximize your aura to about 50 feet. It covers a little bit less than a blue objective. And the reason for this is the whole reason you're playing a leader is for your aura. It benefits all of your teammates. That's why you play the leader class. The leader class is basically a generic survivor. They have no pluses, they have no minuses outside of their aura. So, being able to increase the effectiveness of that aura. Now, while some players would say that Master of Influence is stronger because it directly strengthens the effects of your aura, most people misunderstand what Master of Influence does, and most of the skills that are in front of it aren't particularly great. Whereas in this tree, I can spend 5 points to get much more value in a much more dire situation than Master of Influence brings. So let's talk about it. I Can Still Help is an aura where whenever you are bleeding out or you become a soul, your aura will remain fixed on the ground at the location of your body. That applies whether you're bleeding out or a soul. This can be incredibly important for being able to maintain the effect of your aura regardless of the character that you're playing. So, for example, if you are playing Leader Ashe, you get El Jefe's benefit even when you go down and even when you die. Now, if a survivor picks up your soul, that aura will still persist. However, it will not follow the player that has your soul around. It will stay on the location of your body. So this is important to note that a warrior, for example, cannot just pick it up. Now, in my opinion, El Jefe is actually the worst character for this because he only gets El Jefe Grande when he performs the aura's effect, when he gets the finisher kill or the dismemberment. But at 15% with the 20% fear resist, it can be a decent ability. The other two are better, being 25% either melee or gun buff, are all particularly good. The skills in front of it also are better, in my opinion. Deep Pockets ammo is good for making sure, I see a lot of players avoid this, is very good for making sure that you have enough ammo, given that you will always be the second best gun dealer on the team besides your hunters. So you as a leader should always be picking up as much ammo and should have whatever the second best gun is that's available, even if you are playing Ashe or Arthur, who are inherently more melee based. And I see a lot of people skipping over this tree. I see a lot of people tend to build this with Arcane Knowledge, Master of Influence, and then fast forward. I simply prefer this better. You spend less points to get more value out of it, and I think I Can Still Help is one of those main abilities that as a leader you should focus on getting to keep your aura up longer. While Master of Influence does strengthen the effect of your aura by a little bit, the 20% gain is not much because it's 20% of your existing aura, as I've mentioned in previous videos. So El Jefe's ability is only going up by 6%. Same thing if you prestige him to prestige 1 and you have it at 20%, Master of Influence is only going up to 24%. So it's 24%. So it's not particularly a great ability, especially when you can run I Can Still Help for 1 point, and even Echoes of an Aura for 1 point, which is another sneaky one, but I wanted to give the shout out to I Can Still Help because I do think it is overall the better ability. Now, most of your warriors are going to be running fairly standard damage trees for the most part. Most builds either spec into like damage reduction and amulets, or they're going to build into straight damage. One of the abilities that really can help amplify your damage in dire situations is Second Wind. Now, I don't run Second Wind on every character, although I am planning on doing that with prestige points once I unlock the skill points for the other 2 characters. Second Wind is a really good ability, particularly on the 2 tankier warriors, that being Army of Darkness and Henry the Red. Second Wind is relatively cheap. You do need to spend 3 points to get the most value out of it, but you can access it fairly early on in the tree. A lot of people take Fighting Shape, but against a good demon, you will never be above 95% for the majority of the game, and that damage bonus is also lower at 15% compared to 20% on Second Wind. Second Wind increases your melee damage by a good chunk, when your health drops below a certain threshold. Now, with 1 point into it, I would not recommend it. That health threshold is too low, that damage bonus is also too low. And at 40%, the 10% damage boost is actually kind of nice. However, where it really shines is the 50%, 20% damage bonus. This means that anytime you drop below half of your health, you automatically get 20% bonus melee until you get above 20% or 50% of your maximum health. This means if you're playing with a bad support, or if you're not playing with a support, if you're out of Shems or Amulets, late game scenarios where you're low on health, low on resources, and you just need that little bit of damage to put yourself over the edge, Second Wind can help bail you out. And if you're stacking this with your other abilities, this becomes even better. So just looking at this build, I have 50% damage from my warrior class. That goes up from 50 to 65%. My light attacks go from 65% to 80%. And anytime I drop below 50% of my health, I now go to 100%, meaning whatever the weapon damage is on my weapon of choice, I'm going to be dealing essentially double that. So in this build right here, the downside to it is obviously you don't want to be below that specific threshold, because demon players do an absurd amount of damage, and you can go down very quickly. But in scenarios where the demon is 1 or 2 hits away from dying, it may actually be more impactful for you with Second Wind to go for 1 or 2 extra swings, rather than trying to dodge out with Artful Dodger, or risk going for a Shemsa Amulet to heal or shield yourself and buy you more time. If you can just kill that demon player straight away, then have the safety for a second to go ahead and do that. This also does stack with the last word, meaning that the final hit damage of your combo will gain an even bigger bonus from Second Wind. And I can tell you from personal experience, playing as Army of Darkness Ashe, that having the last word up with Devastating Force, Sting Like a Bee active, Second Wind active, Wiseman's Potion active, on a common chainsaw, you can easily get over 1200 damage on the final hit of a light combo. And that's not even including if you have a leader bonus or anything else. Now you might assume that that's a lot of stats to have going, but not particularly. If you're trying to 1v1 a boss to take the pressure off your team, the only 2 things that you have to do are have press circle ahead of time for Wise Man's and be below 50% health. And even in the previous example of not pressing Wise Man, that's still 100% bonus just for being below 50% health when you add up all of these numbers. So I think this is a really, really good ability for warriors, even though you don't necessarily want to be at that health threshold. The Hunter category was a lot more difficult for me to pick my nominee as to what I would build into this category for. A lot of builds primarily consist around Hollow Points maxed out, Wig Splitter maxed out, maximize your headshot damage. Most people go for Last Chance because 20% bonus damage for the last bullet of a gun. On one-shot weapons, that's basically permanent 20%, and on two-shot guns, that means every other shot is 20%. However, the one that I decided to go for as my sneaky pick was Deadly Up Close. Deadly Up Close is the preferred of choice for the exact same reason that I choose Second Wind over Fighting Shape. It is much more common for you to be using your gun within 16 feet than it is from further than 32 feet away. The damage bonus is also larger. Deadly from a distance caps at 15%, Deadly Up Close caps at 20%. So, the demon player has a tendency to rush you, and the better hunter weapons in the game tend to be close-range weapons. The various shotguns, like the double barrel, the shotgun, the boomstick, the blunderbuss, these are primarily close-range options. While they do have some range to them, you get a lot more value out of them from being up close. Deadly Up Close makes that even better. And again, when we look at the numbers, you're at 50% bonus gun damage. Hollow Points takes it to 75%. Deadly Up Close can take that number from the 75% up to 95%. Last Chance, if you're running, say, a Blunderbuss build, is taking that to 115%, and that's not even factoring in Wig Splitter if you manage to hit a headshot. This build essentially allows you to be the one-shot wonder at very close ranges, if you're willing to take that risk of getting up close and brawling with the demon, so to speak, and having to burn stamina to dodge out. But particularly on close-range characters, such as Hunter Ash and Kelly, this gets you a lot of value. Even if you are, for example, playing into Amanda, and I tend to play my Amanda into a pistol build, you can still get a good amount of value out of Deadly Up Close as well, because the pistol itself deals less damage. For the support category, I was having a hard time figuring out what to run, because there are a few things I see a lot of support players doing that I'm not particularly fond of. The most common thing that I think I see is there are a large amount of support players that don't max out Packing Pop or don't max out Deep Pocket Shemps. They're only running the bonus 1 instead of the bonus 2, and I don't understand why. For that extra 1 point isn't extra Shemps you start with, it's an extra Shemps you carry. This is really what makes support so good. And as much as I thought about including either of these two in this scenario, I ended up settling on Good Karma as a filler. The 10% percentage of health means a lot more on support characters, because support characters are having higher health bars than 2 of the other 3 classes. The only ones that have higher health bars would be the warriors, and even then the blacksmith has more. So 10% health back is a much stronger benefit. Now, first aid is something a lot of support players do like to spec into. The support is oftentimes the character that's going to get focused the most, meaning they don't necessarily want to be going for the revive all the time, or they're the one in need of a revive themselves. So first aid is primarily the reason why I didn't mention that, because a lot of players are going to max this out. This does give a solid benefit. Your teammate recovers much more health than normal. If you have first aid max, like I do on most of my supports, then this gives you a rather large chunk of healing. However, the reason why I'm mentioning Good Karma as a one-off filler is a lot of support builds have only 1 or 2 filler spots remaining if they are properly built. So those 1 or 2 filler spots can be used to not a lot of great effect if you think about it. You can do what I do and start working your way towards other abilities that you might want, or you can put them into something much more impactful. Brave Survivor's not bad, but if the demon's not really possessing survivors, there's no real point to it. Whereas Good Karma just helps keep you alive as a support longer. Obviously, this doesn't give you much value if you're already at full health, but anything you can do to keep yourself alive will help keep the team alive longer. So first aid is while it is a strong ability, and it does benefit your team a lot, it's also a pretty common ability to run, and every survivor is going to be running first aid. Not a lot of survivors think about Good Karma. Not a lot of survivors think about taking care of themselves. Even if you're only running it at 1 point, it's still a strong ability. For your generic ability that I think is the most underrated, that's shared between most of the classes in the game, I have to talk about Devastating Force. And it seems like a bit of an exaggeration, because most people think of it as being a warrior-based skill. Devastating Force is much more than that. Devastating Force is always going to be at 4 points, and it's always going to give you 15% bonus melee at those 4 points. And the reason why this is important is that melee combat is an option that is available to every single character in the game, whether you are unarmed or have a weapon. Devastating Force just simply makes you better. You also have a lot more stealth from the demon. Now, each of the trees has a different access point to Devastating Force. An example of this is that you have to wait until the 5th part of your tree on the leader tree. Now, 2 of your leaders you're obviously going to be speccing into. A lot of people don't think about speccing it into Annie anymore, because Annie is mostly based around guns. My prestige points will be going into Devastating Force on her. The reason why I want to mention this is because leaders are normally neutral on melee damage. They don't have bonuses or negatives on it, and Devastating Force removes basically the penalty, so to speak. You don't have to invest points into Pink F to get value. Just having Devastating Force makes you at plus 15%. Warriors, which are already big, tanky, already deal a lot of melee damage, they are plus 50%. They get access to it very early, and most warriors are going to max it. It puts them at 65% melee damage. There's no reason on a warrior to not get it. Now, hunters are a bit more specialized because they are much further into the hunter tree than the other classes in the game, but they're also minus 30 on melee, meaning that the 15% from Devastating Force essentially removes half of that penalty. Now, warriors are melee characters and hunters are range characters, so you might think, why would I ever build a hunter into Devastating Force? And it's not something, by the way, that you're going to be able to build into on every single character with your spirit point gains unless you go out of your way to do it. Because it is going to take a lot of points in order to get over to there. Mostly because Lone Wolf in front of it is also a really good ability. However, one of the main reasons why I think the Devastating Force is even good on Hunters is because should you run out of ammo for your weapon, your teammates won't or can't drop you anymore. This can bail you out in some situations where you have a decent high rarity melee weapon and you're not hitting as hard with it as you could be. And last but not least, some of the support characters, particularly Ash and the Blacksmith, get much more value out of Devastating Force, but all supports can benefit because Devastating Force is a good way to remove your penalty as a support, similar to the Hunter. All supports are minus 20% to gun and melee, and both Hollow Points and Devastating Force will remove 15% off of them. They don't get access to Hollow Points at 4, like the Hunters do, and I believe the Leaders do, but they do get access to Devastating Force at 4. So they can take the minus 20% melee damage and turn that into minus 5. And on characters like Support Ash, where his healing is a big part of his melee, and on the Blacksmith, who has Weapon Master Melee, which puts him at plus 25%, he can stack even more damage when you include Devastating Force, bringing him to plus 40%. Just with Devastating Force alone. That's not even including if you run the Weapon Master, which could take you to plus 50, etc. So, very important, in my opinion, to focus on making sure that your characters all can hit hard regardless of the scenario. If you are playing Amanda, for example, you don't want to be trapped without ammo for your pistol and then find yourself with a common sword wondering why you're only doing about 50 damage a swing. So, that's been my thoughts. Hope you enjoy.